The sound of rain echoed softly outside the old film studio in Vancouver. Inside, bright lights filled the space, bouncing off the metal beams and dusty mirrors. Cameras stood ready, waiting for the next scene. It was supposed to be another long day of shooting, but something felt different. The air carried a quiet weight, as if everyone sensed something unspoken. Keanu Reeves adjusted his jacket and glanced around. The crew moved in silence, focused but restless. Sandra Bullock sat at the far end of the set, near a glowing lamp that cast warm light over her face. Usually she laughed between takes, sharing jokes with the makeup team and teasing Keanu about his calm nature. But today she said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the floor, her hands folded tightly around a small silver pendant. Keanu noticed it right away. He always noticed small things. He could tell when someone's smile was forced or when silence meant more than words. As the director called for a short break, Keanu walked past the cameras, pretending to check his script, but his eyes stayed on Sandra. She didn't look up. Her lips moved slightly, whispering something only she could hear. He thought it might be lines from the script, but then he saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes. Something inside him tightened. "Sandra," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. She blinked and looked up, trying to smile. "Hey, Keanu. Sorry, I was just thinking. You okay?" he asked gently. Yeah, just tired," she replied, but her voice cracked slightly at the end. He nodded, not pushing further. He knew she didn't like attention when something bothered her, but he couldn't stop thinking about that pendant. She kept holding it like it meant everything. The assistant director called everyone back to position. The next scene was emotional, a moment of goodbye between their characters. As the cameras rolled, Keanu looked at her and saw something real in her eyes. It wasn't acting. Her sadness wasn't part of the script. He spoke his lines slowly, feeling her pain through every word. When the scene ended, the director yelled, "Cut!" But Sandra stayed still, frozen in place. Her eyes glistened with tears that weren't meant for the camera. She quickly turned away, muttering, "I need a minute." Before anyone could respond, she walked off the set. The crew exchanged glances but said nothing. It wasn't uncommon for actors to get emotional, but this felt different. Keanu hesitated for a moment, then followed her quietly. He found her in the small rehearsal room next door. The lights were dim, and the rain tapped softly against the windows. She sat on the floor, holding a folded letter in one hand and the pendant in the other. Her shoulders shook as she tried to wipe her tears. Keanu didn't want to intrude, but something told him she shouldn't be alone. He knocked softly on the doorframe. "May I sit?" She nodded without looking up. He sat beside her on the wooden floor, leaving a respectful space between them. Neither spoke for a long time. Only the rain filled the silence. Finally, Sandra whispered, "It's from someone I lost a long time ago." She showed him the letter, folded so tightly it looked like it had been opened many times. "A friend?" Keanu asked quietly. "Someone who helped me when I had nothing left," she said. Her voice trembled, but she kept talking. "It came during the darkest time of my life. I never knew who sent it, but the words saved me." Keanu looked at her gently. "What did it say?" She smiled weakly. "It said, 'The world still needs your light, even when you can't see it.' I kept it all these years. Every time I feel lost, I read it again." Keanu felt a strange warmth in his chest. Those words sounded familiar, almost too familiar. But he stayed quiet. It wasn't the time to ask questions. After a few minutes, Sandra took a deep breath and put the letter back into her bag. "Sorry, I shouldn't bring this to work. I just had a rough morning. I found another letter today from the same charity mail service. I haven't opened it yet." "Take your time," Keanu said softly. She nodded. "Thank you, Keanu. You always know when to show up quietly." He smiled, though inside something began to stir. As she stood and left the room, Keanu noticed a second envelope lying under the chair. It must have fallen from her bag. It had her name written in neat handwriting, and something about it made his heart race. He picked it up carefully, planning to return it later, but as he turned the envelope in his hand, he froze. The handwriting looked exactly like his own. The next day, Keanu couldn't focus. Between takes, his mind kept going back to that envelope. He remembered years ago, long before he worked with Sandra again, he had written letters under a false name, sending words of hope to hospital patients through a charity foundation. He never expected anyone to reply. He just wanted to help strangers who were hurting because he knew what pain felt like. Could it be possible that one of those letters had reached her? The thought filled him with confusion and awe. He wanted to ask her, but how could he? What if it broke her heart to know the truth? What if she wasn't ready to hear it? That night, Keanu sat alone in his trailer staring at the rain outside. He took out his old notebook, the same one he had used to write those letters years ago. His handwriting hadn't changed. The same gentle strokes, the same slant. It matched perfectly with the envelope he found. He whispered to himself, "What are the chances?" As thunder rolled in the distance, he decided he needed to find out. The next morning, before the shoot began, Keanu went to the charity office that handled those letters. The woman at the desk looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves, it's been a long time since you sent one of your kindness letters. How can I help you today?" He leaned forward and spoke softly. "I need to know if one of my letters ever reached someone named Sandra Bullock." The woman checked her computer and nodded slowly. "Yes, about 10 years ago. She was listed as a private recipient during a difficult time. Your letter was one of many we forwarded anonymously. She even wrote a thank you note, but it couldn't be delivered because there was no return address." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The truth was right there. He had unknowingly written the words that once saved Sandra's spirit. He left the office quietly, feeling a strange mix of shock and humility. Fate had worked in silence, connecting them long before they knew it. Now, sitting in his car under the morning sun, Keanu realized something powerful. Sometimes kindness travels far even when you forget it ever left your hands. Later that day, as filming began again, Keanu saw Sandra smiling faintly. She seemed lighter, calmer, as if she had made peace with something. When she caught his gaze, she said softly, "Thank you for checking on me yesterday." He smiled back. "Anytime." But inside, he carried the secret that changed everything. The woman he once helped through words had become the friend who now reminded him every day that quiet kindness can echo through time. As the cameras rolled and their characters reunited in the film, Keanu's voice carried more emotion than ever before. He wasn't just acting anymore. He was living a truth that destiny had written long before. And as the lights dimmed and the scene ended, Keanu whispered to himself, "Sometimes we save someone without even knowing." The next morning began with a soft glow over the studio grounds. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of damp air and new beginnings. Sandra arrived early, her coffee in one hand and her script in the other. She greeted the crew with her usual smile, but Keanu noticed it wasn't the same. There was warmth, but also a distance. Something still lingered behind her eyes, something that even sleep couldn't quiet. He had spent most of the night thinking about the truth. He could hardly believe that fate had connected them through a letter written so long ago. He remembered that time clearly. It was a lonely winter, right after he lost someone dear. He had started writing those letters to help others heal because he couldn't heal himself. He never signed his full name, only John K. It was easier that way. It was anonymous kindness, with no strings, no expectations. But now one of those letters had reached her, years before they met again. And somehow, destiny had brought her back into his life just when she needed comfort again. As the director set up the first scene of the day, Keanu stood near the monitors pretending to review his script, but his mind was far away. He wondered if he should tell her. But would it sound strange? Would it take away the magic of what the letter meant to her? Sandra walked in, her steps light, carrying a small notebook. She looked calm, but Keanu sensed she was holding something inside. When she caught his eyes, she smiled softly. "You always look like you're thinking too deeply," she teased. He laughed quietly. "And you always act like you're not." She sat beside him, flipping through her notes. "You know, last night I read that second letter. The one I told you about." His heart skipped a beat. "Yeah? What did it say?" "It said," she began, "that kindness travels through unseen paths, and sometimes the stranger who gives you hope might be standing right beside you someday." She paused, looking down at the page. "It's strange, right? Like someone knew what was coming." Keanu's throat tightened. He couldn't speak for a moment. The words were almost exactly what he used to write. He forced a small smile. Maybe some people just understand pain and hope the same way. Sandra nodded slowly. Maybe. Or maybe the universe connects us with people for a reason. Their conversation was interrupted when the director called everyone to positions. The scene was a reunion sequence, emotional and quiet. They sat on a park bench surrounded by fake autumn leaves. The cameras rolled, and their lines spoke of forgiveness, friendship, and unseen bonds. But as Sandra delivered her dialogue, her voice trembled again. She wasn't just acting, she was feeling something real. When the scene ended, the director clapped. Perfect. That's the one. The crew moved away, but Sandra stayed seated. Keanu stayed too. He turned to her. You okay? She looked at him, her eyes wet. It's strange. When I read those letters, I felt like the person who wrote them understood me completely. And now, sitting here acting with you, I feel the same thing. Her words hit him deeply. He wanted to tell her the truth, to say that he had been that voice all along. But his heart told him not yet. Maybe she needed the mystery. Maybe she needed the comfort of the unknown. After lunch, Keanu went back to his trailer. He opened his old notebook again, tracing the faded words. Dozens of pages filled with short notes, prayers, and lines meant for strangers who would never know his name. He had written them during nights when silence was heavier than sound. He flipped through the pages until he found the original draft of Sandra's letter. It was almost identical to the one she kept. His handwriting was shaky back then, the ink smudged with time. Reading it now filled him with quiet pride and a bit of sadness. He whispered, You never know who's reading your kindness. That evening, when the shoot wrapped, Sandra walked toward the parking lot. Keanu followed her outside, the orange sunset painting the sky in warm colors. They stood near her car, surrounded by quiet streets and the faint hum of city life. You know, she said softly, I used to think letters like those were just random, but now I feel like they're meant to reach certain hearts. Keanu nodded. Kindness always finds its destination. Sometimes it just takes a few years. She smiled faintly, looking at him in a way that made time slow down. You really believe that? I've seen it happen, he said honestly. Before she could reply, a young crew member approached, holding something small. Miss Bullock, you dropped this near the dressing room. It was the silver pendant. Sandra gasped and took it carefully. Thank you. The pendant had a small engraving, but Keanu had never seen it closely before. Now he noticed it, tiny letters carved inside. She held it toward the light. You see this? It's the same words as the letter, the same message. Keanu leaned in to read it. It said, The world still needs your light. His own handwriting flashed in his memory. He had written that exact sentence. She sighed, smiling softly. It was my mother's pendant. She gave it to me before she passed, but the engraving was added later, after I got the letter. I wanted to carry those words with me. He stood silent, feeling his heart grow heavier. Every moment made the connection deeper. She had carried his words next to her heart all these years, never knowing they were his. As they stood under the setting sun, a breeze passed by, lifting a few leaves from the ground. Sandra looked peaceful now, as if sharing her pain had lifted a part of it. Thank you for listening yesterday, she said softly. Not everyone knows how to listen. Keanu smiled. Sometimes silence says the right words. She nodded, whispering, Yeah. Silence feels like kindness when it's real. As she drove away, Keanu stayed there, watching the fading light. His mind replayed everything. The letters, her tears, the pendant, the words carved in silver. He knew he couldn't keep the secret forever. She deserved to know the truth, even if it changed how she saw him. That night, he sat at his desk again. The notebook lay open before him. He took out a clean page and began to write, Dear Sandra, you once said kindness finds its way home. Maybe it finally has. There's something I should tell you. The letters you received years ago were written by me. I never meant for you to find out this way, but I believe you should know. You were never just an actress I admired. You were someone whose strength reminded me that hope matters. I just wanted to return that hope when you lost yours. He read the note twice, folded it, and stared at it for a long time. Then he placed it in an envelope and wrote her name carefully on top. But before he could deliver it, he hesitated. Something inside told him it wasn't the right moment yet. Maybe she needed one more day of peace before learning the truth. He set the letter aside and turned off the light. As he lay in bed, one question kept echoing in his mind. What if destiny had brought them together? Not for a movie, but for a reason far beyond what either of them could see. The answer would come soon, in a way neither of them expected. The next morning arrived bright and calm, but Keanu felt restless. The letter he wrote to Sandra sat on his desk, sealed yet undelivered. Every time he looked at it, his heart pulled in two directions. One part of him wanted her to know the truth, to understand that the stranger who once lifted her spirit had been standing beside her all along. The other part feared that revealing it would change something precious between them. On set, the crew prepared for a complex, emotional scene. Sandra entered quietly, holding her coffee. Her eyes met Keanu's for a moment, and she smiled faintly. That simple smile eased his nerves more than words could. She looked peaceful again, yet there was something in her gaze that hinted she had been thinking deeply. During makeup, the director explained that the day's scene involved two characters realizing they had been unknowingly connected in the past. The coincidence made Keanu's heart pound harder. It was as if the script mirrored their real story. When cameras rolled, the studio grew silent. The scene took place in a small cafe set. Keanu's character was supposed to reveal that he had once written letters to strangers to comfort them. Sandra's character was meant to realize she was one of those people. The irony felt too real. As he spoke his lines, Keanu's voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes you write words for strangers," he said softly, "and years later, they return to you through the people you meet." Sandra looked at him with deep emotion, her eyes reflecting real tears. She wasn't just acting anymore. When the director yelled "cut," no one moved. The silence was heavy and filled with something beyond performance. Sandra wiped her tears and whispered, "That line felt too real." Keanu nodded, forcing a gentle smile. "Yeah, it did." They both stayed quiet after that. Sometimes silence held answers words couldn't express. During the lunch break, Keanu sat outside under a tree near the studio parking area. A soft wind brushed through the leaves. He watched the sunlight filter through the branches and thought about the letter sitting back in his trailer. Should he give it to her now? Before he could decide, he heard her voice behind him. "You're always hiding in quiet places," she said. He turned, smiling. "Guess I like peace." She sat down beside him, folding her legs. "You know, I've been thinking about those letters again. There's something strange about them. The handwriting feels familiar. I can't explain it, but it reminds me of someone I know." Keanu's heartbeat quickened. "Familiar how?" he asked carefully. "The way some words loop," she said. "The way kindness feels written, not just said." "It's the same energy you carry, Keanu. Calm, humble, quiet." She smiled softly, looking at him. "Maybe that's just me imagining things." He tried to laugh lightly, but the sound came out weak. "Maybe," he said quietly. A bird chirped nearby, breaking the silence. Sandra leaned back against the tree, closing her eyes. "You ever think that maybe people meet not by chance, but because something unseen connects them?" "Yes," he answered instantly. "I think kindness connects souls long before they meet." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "You really believe that, don't you?" He nodded. "Completely." Their eyes held for a few seconds longer than usual. She smiled again, then stood up. "You should write a book about kindness one day," she said, before walking back toward the studio. Keanu sat there, frozen, staring at the sunlight. Every word she spoke made him realize how fragile and beautiful their connection had become. It wasn't just friendship or professional respect. It was something deeper. A bond shaped by unseen compassion and shared silence. Later that afternoon, as the crew prepared for another shoot, the assistant director rushed in holding a brown envelope. "This just arrived," he said, handing it to Sandra. "It's from the same charity foundation that sent you those letters before." Sandra looked surprised. "Again? After all these years?" She opened it slowly, and a small card fell out. The crew gave her space while she read. Her lips parted slightly as her eyes moved over the words. Keanu watched her from a distance, feeling his stomach twist with unease. When she finished reading, she stood still for a long moment. Then she walked over to him, holding the card. "Look at this," she whispered. He took it carefully. The message read, "Dear Sandra, thank you for keeping your light alive. Sometimes the one who gave hope needs it returned." Signed, a friend who once wrote with quiet hands. Her hands trembled. "Do you see this?" It's the same message as before, but this time it sounds recent, like the person who wrote it is still watching over me. Keanu looked down at the handwriting. It was his. It was the letter he had written last night but never sent. Somehow, it had been mailed without him knowing. His heart raced as he tried to hide his shock. Someone from the crew must have found it and delivered it to the charity box, thinking it was for her. Fate had made its move before he could. Sandra looked at him curiously. "It's strange, right? It feels so personal. Like whoever wrote it knows exactly what's happening in my life right now." Keanu managed a small nod. "It does," she smiled gently. "Whoever it is, I wish I could thank them in person." He swallowed hard and said softly, "Maybe one day you will." The director called everyone back to set, breaking the moment. As Sandra walked away, Keanu stood there, his mind spinning. Destiny had taken his choice away. She knew now, or at least she would soon realize. That night, Sandra sat alone in her hotel room, rereading the new card. Something about it felt different. She turned on her laptop and began searching for the Charity Foundation's contact email. She wanted to find out who John K. really was. The next morning, Keanu arrived on set early, unaware that his secret was already unfolding. The production assistant handed him a note. "Someone dropped this off for you," she said. He opened it quickly. Inside was a single line written in Sandra's handwriting. "Truth always finds its way, even through kindness." He froze. His hands shook slightly. She knew. A wave of fear, relief, and quiet awe washed over him all at once. He looked up toward the studio door just as Sandra walked in. Her eyes met his across the room. There was no anger, only calm understanding. For a moment, time stopped. He realized she didn't need explanations. She already understood everything: the letters, the kindness, the silence. She gave him a small nod, as if to say thank you without words. And in that silent exchange, something beautiful happened. They both realized that kindness doesn't need recognition. It only needs to be felt. But what neither of them knew was that their story wasn't over. The truth had reached her, but the world was about to discover it too, in a way that would shock them both. The next day began with golden light spilling across the studio floor. Everyone seemed cheerful, moving between props and equipment, unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Keanu arrived early, as usual, calm and composed. Sandra came soon after, greeting the crew with a soft smile. There was no tension between them, no awkwardness, only a deep, unspoken understanding. But what Keanu didn't know was that something had changed overnight. Sandra had decided to do something that would alter everything. The night before, after learning the truth, she had written a long email to the charity foundation that once delivered the letters. She thanked them for being the bridge that connected hearts across time. She mentioned Keanu by name, not in accusation, but in gratitude. She wrote, "He never told me himself, but I understand why. Sometimes kindness hides not to be praised, but to protect its purity." The foundation replied early that morning, asking for permission to share her message on their social page as an example of how one small act of compassion can travel years and still change lives. Sandra hesitated, then agreed, thinking it would stay quiet and private. But the internet had other plans. By the time they started filming, the post had spread across platforms. Fans shared it everywhere, quoting her words and praising the story of an anonymous letter that saved Sandra Bullock, written years ago by Keanu Reeves. Within hours, news outlets picked it up. The crew began whispering during breaks, scrolling through their phones. Someone showed Keanu a post. His heart skipped a beat as he read his own words from years ago, printed beneath a photo of Sandra. "The world still needs your light, even when you cannot see it." The caption below read, "Keanu Reeves unknowingly saved Sandra Bullock's life with an anonymous letter years ago." His hands tightened slightly around the phone. He looked up and saw Sandra standing by the lights talking with the director. She hadn't realized the story had gone public yet. He walked toward her quietly. "Sandra," he said gently, She turned, smiling. "Morning, Keanu." He hesitated, then asked softly, "Did you send something to the foundation?" She frowned slightly. "Yes, I just wanted to thank them." "Why?" He handed her the phone. She looked at the screen and froze. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the hundreds of comments, the reposts, the headlines. "Oh no," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Keanu spoke calmly, though his voice was tight. "It's okay. It's already out there." "People are going to make this into something dramatic," she said worriedly. "I only wanted to honor kindness, not expose you." "You didn't do anything wrong," he replied gently. "You told the truth, and maybe the world needs to hear it." The director called them to set, but the air felt heavy now. The crew looked at them differently, not with judgment, but with awe. They all knew the story. The idea that their quiet, humble stars had shared such a deep, unseen connection moved everyone. During lunch, the studio's publicist arrived, suggesting they make an official statement before rumors twisted the truth. Sandra looked nervous, but Keanu simply nodded. "We'll handle it," he said calmly. They sat together in a small conference room while reporters waited outside. Sandra turned to him. "Keanu, I'm sorry. I should have told you before writing to them." He smiled gently. "You don't have to apologize for being grateful. Still, I exposed something that was yours to keep private." He looked into her eyes. "It stopped being mine the moment it saved you. Kindness belongs to everyone it touches." Her eyes softened. "You always know how to say things like that." The press conference began quietly. There were no dramatic lights or flashing cameras, just a small group of journalists and a few crew members. Sandra spoke first, her voice steady. "Years ago," she said, "when I was going through a dark time, I received an anonymous letter that reminded me to keep going. I never knew who wrote it until recently. It was Keanu." The room fell silent. She continued. "He never mentioned it, never sought recognition. He just wrote because he cared about strangers. And I think that's what makes kindness so powerful, when it asks for nothing in return." Keanu spoke next, his voice soft but clear. "I never thought anyone would find out. I just wanted to help people feel seen. I think we all need reminders sometimes that light still exists, even when life feels dark. If that letter helped, then I'm grateful." One reporter asked, "Did you ever imagine it would reach someone so close to you?" Keanu shook his head. "No. But it reminds me that sometimes we meet people not by chance, but through unseen kindness already shared." The room was silent for a few seconds before soft applause filled the space. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was warm, genuine, respectful. After the press left, Sandra looked at Keanu and whispered, "You handled that with so much grace." He smiled. "So did you." As they walked out together, they found the crew waiting. Some clapped quietly, others simply nodded with respect. A few had tears in their eyes. That night, the story dominated headlines worldwide. Articles called it the letter that changed Hollywood's heart. Social media flooded with messages about unseen acts of kindness and the power of empathy. Fans shared their own stories of letters, words, and strangers who had changed their lives. Keanu didn't open any of the posts. He didn't need to. He knew that what mattered wasn't the attention. It was the ripple of goodness spreading because of a single moment of care. Sandra, however, watched the reactions. She smiled at the comments that spoke about hope and love. Then she read one message that made her stop. It said, "Thank you both for proving that kindness doesn't expire." She felt her eyes fill with tears. The next morning, as the cast gathered for filming, the mood on set was different. It felt lighter, brighter. People smiled more, spoke softer, treated each other with unexpected gentleness. As the cameras rolled, Sandra turned to Keanu during a take and whispered a line that wasn't in the script. "The letter may have saved me, but your silence taught me respect." Keanu smiled quietly, replying in character but meaning every word. Sometimes silence is where kindness begins. The director didn't call cut. He let the moment breathe, letting their real connection become part of the film. What neither of them knew yet was that the story was about to reach someone else. Someone connected to the past. someone who would reveal one final secret neither of them expected. The next day, both Keanu and Sandra arrived early on set. The press storm had calmed overnight, replaced by waves of admiration. Fans called them symbols of quiet strength. Charities began quoting their words about kindness, and schools used the story in lessons about empathy. Yet amid all the attention, both actors stayed grounded, their bond now deeper but still wrapped in silence. Sandra walked up to Keanu with 2 coffees. "You didn't read the comments, did you?" she asked playfully. He smiled faintly. "No." "Kindness isn't a headline," she laughed softly. "Still, people are learning from it. Maybe that's what it was meant for." Before he could answer, a woman approached holding an old file. She introduced herself as Lena, a volunteer from the same charity foundation. She looked emotional as she spoke. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Bullock, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both should see." She handed Sandra a small yellowed envelope. "We found this while reviewing our archives after your story went public. It was never delivered." "It's addressed to you, Mrs. Bullock." Sandra blinked in surprise and carefully opened it. Inside was a faded letter written in the same familiar handwriting. The message read, "Dear Sandra, if this ever reaches you, it means you kept going. I don't know your name, but I know your pain. One day, you'll stand in the light again and help someone else do the same. When that day comes, you'll know kindness doesn't end with the one who starts it." Her hands trembled slightly. "It's his handwriting," she whispered, looking at Keanu. Lena nodded. "This was one of the earliest letters you sent, Mr. Reeves. It was misplaced and never reached her until now." Keanu stared at it, speechless. It felt as if time had folded back on itself. Fate had kept this letter hidden until the perfect moment. Sandra smiled through her tears. "You see, Keanu, even your forgotten kindness waited for the right time to arrive." He shook his head softly, humbled. "Maybe some things are meant to find their way when we're ready to understand them." Later that day, they filmed one last emotional scene together. It was quiet, simple, and full of meaning. When the director called cut, everyone stayed silent for a few moments, moved by something they couldn't explain. As the sun set, Sandra handed Keanu the faded letter and said, "You once gave light to strangers. Today you gave it back to yourself." He smiled gently. "And you showed the world that kindness doesn't need to be loud to be heard." The two stood in silence, watching the light fade behind the studio windows. The world had learned their story, but for them, the real miracle wasn't fame. It was the circle of compassion that kept returning home. A week later, the filming ended. The story that began with a letter had now turned into something far greater. Newspapers still spoke about it, but both Keanu and Sandra stayed quiet, choosing peace over publicity. For them, the meaning wasn't in the fame. It was in the gentle reminder that small acts of kindness could live forever. On the final day, the studio hosted a small farewell gathering. Candles and fairy lights glowed across the courtyard. Everyone laughed, shared memories, and took photos. Sandra and Keanu stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the team that had become family. Sandra looked at him and smiled softly. "You know, when this movie started, I thought it was just another role. Now I feel like I lived something real." He nodded. "Maybe that's what good stories do. They remind us who we are." A volunteer from the charity arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small wooden box. "We wanted to give you both something," she said shyly, "because your story has inspired thousands to write letters of hope again. We're starting a new campaign in your names. It's called The Circle of Light." Inside the box were hundreds of envelopes from around the world, letters written by strangers to strangers. Some were for patients in hospitals, others for refugees, teachers, or children. The volunteer continued, "Each letter begins with the words your story made famous. The world still needs your light." Sandra covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Keanu's eyes softened as he picked up one of the envelopes. It was from a young boy who wrote, "Dear stranger, Today I smiled again, because someone told me I matter. He looked at Sandra and said quietly, "This is what it was always meant to be, not about us, but about everyone who remembers to care." Tears filled her eyes. "You gave me light once, Keanu. Now it belongs to the world." As the evening continued, they both stayed by the glowing candles, reading letters together. Some made them laugh, others made them cry. Every word felt like a spark of hope. When the crowd began to leave, Sandra looked at the sky. "Do you ever wonder how many people live because of one act of kindness?" Keanu smiled gently. "I think it never stops. It moves from heart to heart, like light passing through windows." She turned toward him, her voice soft but steady. "Then promise me something. Keep writing, even if you never sign your name." He nodded. "Only if you promise to keep shining." They both laughed quietly. The night air was calm, the candles flickered softly, and the stars above seemed closer than usual. A few days later, a final twist of fate arrived. During an international interview, the host asked Sandra what kindness meant to her now. She smiled and said, "It means knowing that someone, somewhere, might be holding a letter written years ago, a letter that keeps them alive, and maybe they'll never know who wrote it. But that's the beauty of it." The host asked if she still kept the pendant with the engraved words. Sandra held it up proudly. "Always. It reminds me that the smallest light can reach the darkest place." After the show, she found a note slipped quietly into her bag. No one saw who placed it there. It was written in familiar handwriting and said, "Thank you for carrying the light when I could not." She smiled, knowing exactly who wrote it. That evening, she called Keanu and said softly, "You left me another letter." He chuckled on the other end. "Old habits die hard." She laughed, wiping away a small tear. "Thank you for everything." "No," he said kindly. "Thank you for proving the light was never lost." Months later, the Circle of Light project spread to dozens of countries. Millions of letters were written, and every envelope began with the same words that once saved one heart and then many more. "The world still needs your light." In the end, their story became more than a headline. It became a movement, a reminder that true kindness never asks to be seen. It just travels quietly, finding those who need it most. As years passed, people still spoke about that one letter, that one act, and how it started with two people who believed in quiet goodness. On a calm evening, Keanu visited the charity's main office. The walls were filled with photos of people holding their letters. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to everyone who kept a stranger's light alive." He smiled, touched the plaque gently, and whispered, "The world still needs your light." And somewhere in another city, Sandra whispered the same words before going to sleep, the pendant resting on her heart, still shining faintly in the dark.